Hey guys, welcome back to my exciting book series. Glad you could join me. And today it's the book that I read, so you don't have to. If I Did It, by a great man of letters. His name is OJ Simpson. I know what you're thinking. What's next on your book list? Mein Kampf? That's what I thought. But actually, it turns out this is a love story. OJ himself tells us that in the beginning and the end. He says, they say all stories deep down are love stories, and I guess this is no different, but this doesn't have a happy ending like a lot of love stories. I found that very touching. So, before we get to the review, though, I gotta say, whatever you think of the quality of this book, pretty good, well put together paperback. I want to preserve it, I think, if I'm gonna maybe sell it at a book fair or a tag sale. So, I don't usually do this, but I think I'm gonna put on some gloves to handle the book. So, so. What the hell? That's weird. These fit yesterday. Maybe I shouldn't have left them in the freezer all night. Let me try this one. Okay. What the heck? They don't fit. Alright, had to go for that obvious joke. Now we can move on. So yeah, OJ, you might have heard, died. Was it last week or the week before? And I thought what was really interesting about it was the social media reaction was interesting. I thought that it was kind of crickets that I saw. The silence was deafening, and normally a major A-list kind of celebrity, pretty much a household name, although maybe Gen Zers don't know OJ, I don't know. You would think there would be a lot more reaction. Normally there is, but I think probably what happened was people thought, well, okay, I think R.I.P. OJ's probably out of the question. But OJ kind of existed maybe somewhere in between like Queen Elizabeth and Osama bin Laden. I remember when bin Laden was killed, a lot of people went full on burn in hell bin Laden. And they had a good reason, I would say. But with OJ, that is pretty hardcore intense when someone dies to say burn in hell. So a lot of people are probably torn. Do I go burn in hell, OJ? Is that coming on a little too strong? Maybe I'll let just the Golden family on their Facebook page. So not a lot of reaction, but the whole OJ saga was obviously an insane thing in the mid-90s, and we'll probably never see anything quite like it again, even if a major celebrity were to, God forbid, commit double homicide, because the internet takes us over. There's just a million different directions. People's attention are driven by the internet, although frankly I think all roads lead to these videos. I don't know why everyone's not here, but so I think so the internet was just starting around 94, 95, but it was nothing like now. I mean, in the 90s almost was more like the 80s than it was everything that's come since. I mean, dial-up internet at home, and that's it. It didn't really run our lives, and I think the dominant media forms were still TV and radio, and they were all over this to the point where not only OJ, but everybody, Marcia Clark and Johnny Cochran and Kato Kaelin, and everybody became a household name, and it dominated everything. The Bronco chase happened in June of 94. The trial happened in the summer of 95, and the verdict was late summer, I think early fall. And it's one of those events, one of the few events maybe of my life where you'd say everyone remembers where they were. Like for the Bronco chase, I was at Scott Webb's house Friday night, site of many backdoor parties in Ellington, and also the Knicks were playing the Rockets in the NBA Finals. And I think in hindsight, the most shocking telecast tonight actually was probably the Knicks playing in the NBA Finals. And then for the verdict, I was at UConn. We piled into floor mate Josh Brown. Another shout out to Josh, wherever he may be. The verdict. I remember another of my floor mates, Chris, aka Safari, was particularly enraged by the verdict. And it was absolutely insane. And so OJ wrote this book, and it's pretty crazy. It's famously known for basically the book where OJ basically confesses. Well, basically he does, but he does describe the murder, the night of the murder, but he of course says, picture this. Now mind you, this is all hypothetical. And then he describes the murder scene. Now you think, but once he describes it, you're like, all right, we're going to stop pretending right now, aren't we? The cat's really out of the bag here. Nope. Literally, like the next chapter, he goes, some of you think I'm guilty, but others of you know that I'm innocent. And then he says, I know there's some evidence, quote unquote, but whether it was planted or not. I'm like, OJ, am I hallucinating? Do I need to go back and reread the last chapter? Because I think you told us. But he's still maintaining, but he's probably trying to make it both ways because he knows that there's a segment of people that fervently believed and maybe still believe that he was innocent, so he doesn't want to maybe disappoint his loyal fans. So you get that, but most of the book leads up to that and mostly talks about the marriage with Nicole. And the gist of most of this is he really wants to convince you basically that Nicole was the worst. It's almost like the point of this book is, yeah, I did it, I killed her, but wouldn't you have wanted to kill her too? Now, OJ is a person, I think, of a massive narcissist, and he doesn't necessarily understand that maybe some of us are going to read some of what he says with several grains of salt. And it's interesting how also, what a passive figure he paints himself as being. And a lot of this, I think, is because narcissists don't really, the insight to really connect their own behavior to others' behavior and understand how they relate to each other. So everything is just happening to them all the time. And so that's really what happens here. Everything is just OJ's along for the ride. He starts out where he's married, but he still starts a fling with Nicole. That might have been a red flag for Nicole. But he says, well, the marriage was running its course. Well, maybe that's true, but one problem, his wife at the time was pregnant. That's awkward. So I don't know if his wife was aware that it was running the course. So anyway, he ends up with Nicole, and Nicole wants to get married. OJ says he didn't want to get married because his first marriage didn't work out, but basically Nicole kept nagging me, so I'm a people pleaser, so I do what people want, so we got married. Then Nicole wanted kids, so we had kids, and just everything OJ is all on for the ride. Even their arguments are basically always instigated by Nicole, and including because OJ was accused of spousal abuse before the murders. And there was an incident with the cops in New Year's Eve 1989. OJ says basically Nicole physically attacked me, and I just had to respond a little bit. So she got a couple bruises on her arm because I was just fending off this crazy wild beast attacking me, and everything is happening to OJ. The Nicole wanted a divorce because she said she had no identity. She met him when she was 18. All of her friends were his friends, and she needed to find herself. And then she wanted to get back together. So OJ says, all right, we'll get back together. OJ has no active role in anything. Now, is OJ leaving out some facts? Because basically what OJ constantly tells us is that Nicole was moody, she was crazy, by the end she was doing all these drugs, and man, how do you expect me to deal with that? He doesn't ever really imply that maybe he did anything to create that, but he quotes one of her letters in which maybe he's outing himself by quoting it, because at one point Nicole says to him, I wanted you to be faithful. Now why would she say that? Maybe she's just paranoid? Or did she have reason to think that he hadn't been faithful? Well, I Googled this, and apparently there was a lot of reasons to think that. Apparently there's a rumor that he may have had an affair with Kris Jenner. Now OJ was buddies with the whole Jenner Kardashian, industrial complex. I don't know those people. I can't keep them straight. But anyway, Kris Jenner. I don't think that's the one to transition genders, but again, I don't know. And also Tawny Katane, interestingly, who was an actress, but most famously, I think her finest work, we all agree, was in the Whitesnake videos, Here I Go Again and This Is Love. In There I Go Again, she is straddling a car, and in This Is Love, she's straddling a bed. So they creatively branched out for that video. And life-changing for a lot of adolescent boys like myself. And so yeah, he may have had an affair with her. And by the way, one of the greatest lines in a book, probably of all time, is Chuck Klosterman's Fargo Rock City, where he talks about growing up listening to hair metal, growing up in North Dakota. And he says, Here I Go Again, a lot of people interpret that song as being about staking your own claim in life, traveling down that lonely road, no matter which way society tries to push you. But the director of the video, he interpreted the song a little differently. He interpreted it as being about fucking a car. Brilliant line, in my opinion. So yeah, the bottom line is OJ, maybe if she was crazy, maybe OJ was giving her reasons to be crazy, but he seems to have no insight into that. It reminded me, 10, 15 years ago, I read Sammy Hagar's bio as well, because I like to read rock bios, and there's a similar thing where Sammy basically describes his first wife and basically says, oh man, she was hot, like Nicole, but she turned out to be crazy. It's kind of like, man, I just drew a bad hand of cards. What are you going to do? Sometimes you got to reshuffle the deck. But Sammy also tells us repeatedly that he was living this 70s, 80s rock star lifestyle of sleeping with every groupie known to man. I have to think his wife either knew or suspected. So Sammy, maybe she just wanted a faithful husband and you weren't it, and maybe you contributed anyway to driving her crazy. But some of these guys, again, it's the narcissist behavior where you have no conception of any of that. The other thing OJ is always telling us is that basically Nicole is always apologizing and admitting that everything is her fault. So even Nicole knew everything was her fault. And what's interesting, what's really crazy is Nicole, according to OJ, will go to her therapist. They'll get into a fight. Nicole goes to her therapist, and her therapist always says, you know, Nicole, you were dead wrong, and OJ was absolutely right. Every argument. What kind of therapist is this? If you're thinking about getting a new therapist, OJ, her loving husband, is always right, and he always knows best. I'm like, either this is a lie, or Nicole, again, maybe with self-esteem issues, just put up with it, or I'm thinking, I'm going to be a little more cynical now. Okay, so Nicole didn't work. OJ tells us that because when he starts later dating Paula Barbieri, he goes, you know, it's the first time I ever dated a woman with a job. So OJ's a rich guy. So you think maybe this is be some very rich Hollywood therapist. OJ's paying for the therapist. Does the therapist think, who's really my client here? Who's paying the bills? Is it Nicole or is it OJ? Maybe I'm just gonna kind of, I don't want to lose this gig, so I'm gonna tell things that are flattering to OJ. Did OJ basically bribe the therapist to help brainwash and gaslight his wife? Maybe it's similar to how you can sometimes, bribe attorneys. I've heard that attorneys sometimes will take on a case where they know their client is guilty, but for the right price. I mean, I can't think of any specific attorneys, but maybe Johnny Cochran or Bob Shapiro or F. Lee Bailey, Alan Dershowitz. I don't know, just a few random names that popped to mind. So maybe therapists can be corrupted. So maybe OJ basically spent his life bribing therapists to brainwash his significant others and bribing lawyers to try to brainwash juries. So OJ does describe the murder. I found really interesting though, before he describes it, he basically says, I sat down on my couch and I started feeling depressed. I started feeling old. And he says that my knees bother me from playing football. I needed to have another knee surgery. I had arthritis in my hands. Some days I can't even open a jar. And I just felt old all of a sudden. Then he tells us a story about his father who was in the picture, but the parents were divorced. And his dad was an old school parent rearer where you whoop the kid. And at one time when he was 16, his dad says, you're getting your whooping, boy. And OJ says, no, I wasn't wrong this time. And he says to his dad, if you try to whoop me, I'm going to kick your ass. And his father just walks away and didn't speak to him for 10 years. But it's, and OJ says, well, I realized maybe it wasn't all my dad's fault. So it sounds like it's like, almost again, thinking, well, maybe it's always the woman's fault, and then that feeds his rage towards Nicole. But also, it's another getting old story, except his dad was getting old, no longer able to, your son can now beat you up. And so when he gets to the place and he sees Ron Goldman coming out, well, Ron Goldman was 25 years old. So some of this might have been jealousy, and some of it might have been someone who's just much younger than you, and what you feel jealous about is their youth. In fact, dating Nicole in the first place was maybe a fountain of youth thing. Again, she was 18, he was 30. 30's not old, but as a football player, it is kind of old. And that a lot of that. Now, was OJ claims he was never jealous because he said he was so sick of Nicole by that point anyway, he didn't care. well, I don't know if that's believable. He always phrases it in terms of don't mess with other guys around the kids. So he maybe is using the kids as pawns and claiming that he's just protecting the kids to pretend he's not being jealous. And he describes the murder, but he describes it as basically he takes a knife and then he says, I forgot where I was, I forgot who I was, and then I noticed there was blood on my shirt and I didn't know why. It's interesting because it's very similar to Fight Club, the last book I read, where you have the character where another character inhabits him, Tyler Durden, and he too kills some people at the end as someone else. OJ is kind of describing the same thing, although not an elaborate whole secondary personality. I don't know if real life murders maybe describe that being the case, that they just black out and don't know where they were. And maybe this is part of why when OJ claims he's innocent, he thinks he can say he's innocent because he can say, well, I wasn't conscious really of what I was doing, and I don't know. Anyway, what did I learn from this book? I'm going to say absolutely nothing. But it was kind of an interesting guilty pleasure, I guess. But I think the OJ saga, again, to go back to that a little bit, it was the first sign, and we've seen it more pronounced now on social media, of how divided the country was, because a lot of people, white America, really didn't understand the verdict, and rightfully so. I mean, he should have been convicted, obviously. But a lot of it is because Johnny Cochran so brilliantly converted the trial to being not so much about OJ on trial to the LAPD on trial. And this was only 2 years after the Rodney King beating in LA. And so especially black people in LA had such distrust of the LAPD. And then, of course, the gift from heaven for the defense was Mark Furman. You have a racist cop. And yeah, it's just OJ introduced us maybe more than anything else. Wow, people just see the world in very different ways, and we live in two Americas, and it's only become more pronounced since then. I don't know. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe, please. Please hit. You can hit it. You can click. You can tap. I prefer if you smash, but I'll take anything.